We do have a quorum. At this time, we will move to our federal legislative update. We do have a special guest with us today, and to introduce him, we'll turn to our Vice Chancellor, Marlene Garcia. And welcome.
Thank you very much. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Jee Hang Lee, who's come from Washington, D.C. to join the Board of Governors today to give you the latest update on what's going on in Congress. But I want you to also know that Jee Hang Lee, who is the Director of Public Policy for the Association of Community College Trustees, is a key person that we work with regularly to keep us apprised of all the developments in Washington, D.C. He's available whenever we need him. Weekends, we have a cell phone. And during busy times of the year, Valerie and I certainly have called him on his cell phone. But he also is someone who we work closely with in planning our annual visit to Washington, D.C., and he's an instrumental person with a team of others who plan the annual Washington, D.C. Summit for community college representatives from around the country. But this year in particular, he really helped us out. We were able to schedule a meeting with Congressman Kevin McCarthy, and we were struggling with a venue, and he miraculously found us a venue there at the hotel. We were able to meet with him just after his full presentation before the whole delegation, and we had a very helpful and informative meeting with the congressman, and Jee Hang Lee took care of us and made sure that we had everything we need to have that important meeting. So he's a friend, and he's knowledgeable about the federal process, and we're grateful to have him here today.
Marlene, thank you. President Himmelstein, Chancellor Scott, and the Board of Governors, I bring greetings on behalf of the ACCT Board and President Noah Brown from Washington, D.C. I do want to thank Chancellor Scott and Marlene for extending an invitation to come and speak before all of you. For some of you that don't know this, I'm actually originally from San Jose, so it's a wonderful opportunity to come back to California. I was actually just noting to Marlene that the woman from Mission College who received an award went to the same church I did when I was growing up in California. So it's a very small world. There's a lot of stuff going on in Washington, D.C. right now, as many of you know. We had relatively large news a little over a week ago on a Sunday night, for those of you who were in a cave somewhere, not with Osama bin Laden. So I kind of want to go through where we are, actually from where we came from, and then where we'll go in the next year or two. Now, this slide presentation is kind of extensive, so I'm going to go through a couple of these relatively quickly. Oh, there we go. And this will cover a number of items from the FY 2011 appropriations process to the 2012 appropriations process to a number of the reauthorization bills that we'll be covering that affect community colleges. As many of you know, we're now in the 112th Congress. We're in the first session of that Congress. Obviously, we have a new House. The Republicans are in the majority now. The most important part of that is that there's such a sizable difference between where we were in the 111th to the 112th. The other thing that is relatively interesting is that we have essentially almost a third of the Republican caucus is brand new. So that means many of these individuals will have to learn about the process, will learn about the various bills that encompass running the federal government. And as many of you know, this previous election was dealt heavily on reducing the debt. There was a number of discussions about that, and obviously with the infusion of the Tea Party into the Republican caucus, we've seen that in the last 6 months or so. One of the things that Congress failed to do in the 111th Congress actually was to pass an appropriations bill for FY 2011. So the first order of business for this Congress was to actually try to figure out and pass a FY 2011 appropriations bill. they were ultimately able to come to an agreement, and I'll kind of go into that. But a couple of things that are important to note for community colleges is that with the 112th Congress, they actually are not going to do any earmarks. So that is a major loss. I know the California community colleges had an earmark in FY11 appropriations bill, and obviously that didn't come to fruition. My only guidance to all of you is that this earmark ban is in place for 2 years, but in all likelihood, at some point, the 13, 14, we're going to come back to earmarks. Earmarks are a major political item for members of Congress. They like to fund programs within their own district. The other thing to note is that sometimes an earmark doesn't look like an earmark sometimes, so so that's something to note. You know, as we always say, if it quacks like a duck, but sometimes it might not quack like a duck. So that's something also to think about. And the other thing is it gives you time during this ban to think about programs that you would like to continue or to start, and that gives you an opportunity to have your discussions with your members of Congress about opportunities that will get funding. I noted the FY11. This chart hopefully will kind of give you a broad outline of where we are relative to the federal government and its funding. This is a pie that was provided by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. The thing to note is that the federal government only provides, of its current budget, only 3% of it goes to education. And if you actually take a look at the non-discretionary, non-defense discretionary pie, it's relatively very small. And so you would take a look at defense, Social Security, Medicaid, and then interest on the debt, you're talking about essentially virtually the whole pie. On April 15th, Congress was able to pass the FY11 appropriations bill. The major part of this bill was that there was a cut of $38.5 billion from FY10 levels, in which has a significant impact on a number of programs that community colleges support, obviously. The major thing that did occur was that the Pell Grant program was funded to ensure that the Pell Grant maximum was $55.50. But it did eliminate the summer or year-round Pell Grant program for the upcoming academic year, which is 11-12. So the summer Pell will continue for this upcoming summer, but beyond that, it is now gone. In addition, they also did an across-the-board cut of all non-defense discretionary programs of 0.2%. So every single program was affected by this FY11 appropriations bill. This is a short list of the programs that many community colleges support that were cut. As you can note, that some of these cuts were minor, but will have a lasting effect. The one program that did get cut and eliminated that has a significant impact for community colleges is a tech prep program as part of the Perkins program. And essentially what transpired was that the president released his budget for his FY12 and outlined a number of changes that he wanted to see in the Department of Education. And so if he included any type of cut or movement of money from one account to another, that became the starting point of that conversation, was that since you are already supporting a cut or elimination or moving of that money, we're going to take that. And so that's kind of how some of these programs that you see outlined were basically wiped out. A couple other programs that were on the Department of Labor side. The thing that is very disheartening to us is that the Career Pathways Innovation Fund was eliminated, but most importantly, there was a grant competition for that program that was released in February, late February. And actually, since the funds had not gone out the door by the time this program or the budget was passed, they basically halted that program and took the money back. So all the colleges that applied and took the time to do the applications will no longer get money. And as outlined, a number of the WIA programs were cut also. So now that we're done with FY11, now we're on the specter of FY12, and we're going to be talking about a number of things. I think the thing to note is that the largest education program, that's the biggest unknown right now, is the Pell Grant program. As many of you know, the president in his FY12 budget did support maintaining the maximum $55.50. They did note that summer Pell, the year-round Pell program, would not be feasible anymore because of the finances. The House passed the Paul Ryan budget on April 15th in conjunction with FY11 appropriations bill. It had a number of changes. It had a number of changes to the Medicaid program. It did not touch Social Security. This is just a quick description of some of the provisions to the Ryan plan. From an ACCT and a community college perspective, we don't really get into a number of these items, and we don't take positions on them. But in the next slide, there are significant reforms to the Pell Grant program that they would like to see, which we don't necessarily support. First of all, it actually reduces the maximum to $3,150, which is a $2,400 cut to the maximum. The estimate is that over 1 million students will be dropped off from the Pell Grant program. A number of policy recommendations that were also include reducing the semesters of Pell Grant eligibility, and this is full-time, this is not part-time, so if you're a part-time student, the cap is a little bit different because it's basically full award levels. They would reduce the need analysis formula. They would like to eliminate Pell Grant awards for students of less than half time, which is actually a relatively small amount of money. And they also want to get interest subsidies for undergraduate and graduate loans. I will note that on that list itself, David Boehm, who's my counterpart at AACC, and I have been doing some meetings with individuals who are involved in the appropriations process. It appears that the semester limit is something that they're looking to do. Both sides of the aisles are supportive. I do note, and this is something that California always weighs on my mind as a former Californian. I do bring up scenarios for them of the average time period for a community college student in California to graduate with a degree is around 3 years. And if you take a look at the UC and Cal State system, and on average it's full-time freshmen, you go in, it's 5 years. So if you take a look and you lump in a community college student and get them into a Cal State or UC system, it might take them the whole 12 semesters. It might take them to a 13th or 14th semester. They're cognizant of that, but they're trying to figure out this magic puzzle that they have. And essentially what the puzzle looks like is the following. The program is funded on the discretionary side of around $22 billion. They need to come up with another $11 billion to meet a shortfall for this upcoming year. And what they're trying to do is reduce or save some funds to cut down on the shortfall. All right. Here are some other items relative to the deficit reduction. This is going to be the major topic of discussion, and this conversation is in conjunction with the conversations on the debt ceiling. I know many of you have heard this discussion. We will need to have a vote sometime in the near future to raise the debt ceiling before the government goes into default. The yesterday, which was interesting, was the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, made a speech basically saying that in order for the debt ceiling to be increased, that he was going to hold out for trillions of dollars in cuts to match the increase in the debt ceiling. The most interesting thing to note is that the non-defense discretionary pot of money doesn't even equal $1 trillion. So it'll be interesting where these cuts will be coming from. Obviously, he said everything was on the table except for tax increases. So that will likely include Medicare and also Social Security maybe. Typically, Social Security is the last thing you want to touch. It's called the third rail for a reason. And Marlene kind of just wanted me to focus on Pell because it has such a huge impact, and I know that California has over 400,000 students that are receiving Pell grants in the state. We essentially went from a 6 million recipients of Pell 3 years ago to over 9 million recipients. And the CBO is estimating that for the FY 11-12 academic year, we'll reach 10 million students. $9 billion of the dollars that are distributed through the program go to community college students. And that's why they're really looking heavily at the Pell Grant program, because of this, how fast this program has grown and the ramifications of some of these cuts. So this kind of gives you a framework of where we were and how fast we've grown. I think from a congressional point of view and the White House point of view, the last thing they really want to do is touch the max award level. For those of you who have been in this business long enough know that 10 years ago we were talking about a $4,000 Pell Grant program. In 2008 we were talking about a $4,000 Pell Grant program, and we've only seen a real significant growth in the Pell program in the last 3 years to 5550. So any slippage on the 5550 basically signals that we will likely not be able to see any increases in the maximum in the years to come, whereas the cost of college and attending college has significantly risen from tuition fees and also living costs. The one exciting thing that I'm happy to note is that the grant solicitation for the Community College and Career Training Grant Program has gone out. It went out in January. It just recently closed 3 weeks ago. I know a number of our community colleges in this state and across the country did apply for these funds. The most important thing is this is kind of the iteration from the American Graduation Initiative that did not pass, but was inserted into the Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act. The most important thing to note, and this doesn't necessarily apply to California since it's such a large state, and you obviously get more than this, but each state is guaranteed an allocation of $2.5 million, which is a sizable amount, especially when you're a smaller state like Rhode Island or Delaware, to ensure that you would actually get a pot of money. Yeah. What's that? No, okay. What they would like to do at the Department of Labor, who is running this program with the Department of Education, is to award grants from $2.5 to $5 million, but also encouraging consortia applications across the states and between states. And so we're excited to see you, and hopefully this announcement will be forthcoming later this summer with the grant awards. And this is a program that we're very supportive of, and the funding for this program is $2.5 billion. Actually, it's $2 billion, excuse me. It's a little typo. And it's $500 million for a 4-year period. Now, the most important thing to note with this program is actually on the mandatory side of the ledger, so we don't actually have to fight through the annual appropriations process. So that's something to note, unless they decide to raid the mandatory pot of money. Which brings me up to this subject. The Trade Adjustment Act is up for another renewal. This is a program that typically had strong bipartisan support because it especially affected the Rust Belt states and some other localities. The Congress was unable to figure out how to extend the Trade Adjustment Act, and it essentially expired in mid-February. The one thing that was disconcerting was that the House proposed legislation to deal with the TAA reauthorization by actually cutting the last year of funding for the Community College Training Grant Program that I just talked about in FY14. The interesting thing was that while the community colleges are obviously very concerned about our money getting cut, there were a number of factions that came out in strong opposition to the whole extension of TAA, including the Tea Party, who said that the TAA program was duplicative to all the DOL programs, and so therefore there was no desire to actually extend it. So therefore, Congress has been unable to figure out how to coalesce around this. and to a certain extent that has protected the community college training grant program funds. The Department of Education has promulgated some rules that I just want to kind of bring your attention to. As many of you have heard, gainful employment regulations are about to be forthcoming. This was largely driven, and the Department of Education's focus has largely been focused on the proprietary institutions. The thing to note is that of the 60 or between 50 and 60,000 programs that the Department of Education would like to look at that are subject to employment regulations, 60% of those programs are community college programs. While the focus of this was the proprietary institutions, community colleges will be affected by these changes. There will be new reporting requirements for community colleges, but we believe that since community colleges are lower costed institutions and that our students are less apt to borrow, that we will not be subject to many of these regulations or be sanctioned relative to the debt to income and also the loan repayment. We're still waiting for a number of these regulations to come out, but like I said, it'll still be a regulatory burden for our institutions to find this information. The one thing that wasn't included on the slide is that the Department of Education has issued new rules regarding state authorization and also credit hours. I will just note for the state authorization issue, it is a concern. The Department of Education has basically basically stated that they're not going to do a strict compliance until 2014. These rules basically put the onus on distance education providers to be licensed in states they offer courses. So for an example, if you're a California community college and you offer distance education courses and you have a student in Nevada, you have to be licensed in Nevada to offer that class to that student. We did bring up scenarios to the Department of Education in regards to, well, students come through our door, we don't necessarily recruit these programs to the student. How do we deal with this? Their major point was, if you want to provide something to somebody in a different state, you have to be licensed to provide that service. I have heard in one state where the community colleges within that state are actually not authorized to provide distance education courses even to their students within their own boundaries, because they're under their statute, they're only supposed to be providing distance education didn't occur 60, 70 years ago. So therefore, they have to do some updating of their new authorization. So that will be interesting. The other thing that relative to state authorization is the cost. Some states have high fees that you have to pay to offer courses to students, from $40,000 on down. And so that will have an impact probably on the distance education courses that are available to many students. And I'll kind of go through these slides relatively quickly, and if you have questions, please, raise your hand, and I'm happy to take those questions. Congress has failed to pass a couple of reauthorization bills, one of which is a reauthorization. Like I noted to you about TAA and how the TAA program was stopped was because of duplication. There's sizable discussions about duplication right now that's going on in Washington, D.C. WIA is on the forefront of that. And obviously, the job training courses are very important right now, especially with our high unemployment. But we do expect some type of Senate bipartisan bill. They have been working on a bipartisan basis for the number of years, and I know that the ranking member, Senator Enzi from Wyoming, is very supportive of WIA. I just don't know, and since this has been pending since 2006, I don't know if it's going to come to fruition anytime soon. As many of you know, the DREAM Act, and I saw the California DREAM Act was on the state list. last year it actually had a House vote. It did pass on the House floor, but that bill wasn't able to get 60 votes on the Senate side, and so therefore died. Today in Texas, the president made another announcement, a major speech in support of comprehensive immigration reform, and it mentioned the DREAM Act program. I think the only thing to note for relative to DREAM is that obviously the magic puzzle for the DREAM Act is 60 votes in the Senate side. And until you get 60 votes, you're not going to unlikely be able to move the DREAM Act. The thing that is a little disconcerting from our association point of view is that there are so many iterations of the DREAM Act, from the one that Senator Durbin first introduced in the 111th Congress to the final version that was actually passed by the House, that the universe of students is very unclear. And I think the last iteration that we saw for the House passed bill last year was around 10,000 students from a higher watermark. And so that's something that we're kind of paying attention to, is how many students would be affected by this, the DREAM Act, because obviously no matter what bill passes, the students will have to jump through a number of hoops to be able to realize that the provisions in the DREAM. I know you guys had talked about K through 12 education, ESEA reauthorization still on the forefront. Secretary Arne Duncan is very supportive of dealing with the reauthorization of ESEA, also known as No Child Left Behind. The major thought process to that is that we have proficiency standards that are looming. States need to have a significant number of their students who are proficient in math, science, and reading. It's unclear whether or not, if Congress doesn't deal with this reauthorization, what it means for all the schools, or if everybody just goes into need improvement. Congress is, on the Senate side, is working on a bipartisan basis to try to figure out the NCLB reauthorization. We have heard, and actually one of your members of Congress in California is actually the chairman of the subcommittee, Duncan Hunter. He is, I think, announced that he would try to move pieces of legislation on a piecemeal basis, one or two titles each. Having gone through that in the 108th Congress, or 6th Congress, excuse me, that's probably not the best way to do it, because we didn't pass ESEA reauthorization until the 108th Congress, so it took a couple of years to pass it. But that's the process that they're going to do, and they're going to hopefully try to reach an agreement. The reauthorization of ESEA is a major it is something the president wants to do this year or next year before the election. It's just unclear whether or not that's going to transpire. Obviously, from a community college perspective, a couple of things that we'd like to see, and I know you guys had a robust discussion about this, but we would like to see more dual enrollment, between relationships and partnerships between K through 12 and community colleges. A number of our states, like for an example, like North Carolina, have initiatives that are around this that are funded. And ultimately, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is create a seamless pathway to a higher education, from a high school to community college, and also to a four-year institution. The other thing that we'd like to try to do is to reduce and eliminate remediation at a community college. Obviously, that's something that we're striving to do. I think that the duplication that occurs, or the lack of the standards that colleges have that are not being taught at the K through 12 institutions is problematic, and that's something that we're also striving to do in relative to ESEA reauthorization. All right. Just a quick note. I know that some of you were at the San Diego Regional Community College Summit. This is something that the Department of Education and the White House has pursued in conjunction to the October White House Community College Summit. They just recently had a virtual symposium that also you can view on the Department of Education website. The thing to note is that they are coming out with some type of report from all the proceedings of the the 5 summits, especially around these issues that were in the breakout sessions. right. Relative to ACCT, a couple of things on the horizon. I would encourage you to talk to your colleagues in the community colleges in California. We do have an awards program where we offer, where we give awards to a trustee, a CEO, equity programs, faculty, and professional board staff members. I will note that one of your former Board of Governors, Kay Albiani, received our Trustee Leadership Award a couple of years back, so this is something that I encourage you to apply for or have your institution apply for. Our annual Congress, which is our membership meeting, will be in October 12th to the 15th in Dallas, Texas, and I know that I'm sure I'll see a number of you in Dallas with us. Here's my contact information. The other thing that I would just encourage you to do if you haven't done it, please sign up for our latest action in Washington. It's our email blast, what's going on in Washington, D.C. We also use Twitter and Facebook. I don't do much Facebooking, but I do read my Twitter feed once in a while. This is it's a medium that hopefully you or your colleges are using, and we try to keep everybody in the community college sector abreast of what's going on in Washington, D.C. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Board members, any questions? Member Ramos.
That was a very thorough and comprehensive overview. Thank you. And informative, obviously. I'm going to ask a pretty global question. I've got a budding reputation of asking big questions. You may not be able to answer it, but I'm thinking it's worthy of our thinking when we talk about federal relations. You mentioned the big event that happened a week ago Sunday in other parts of the planet, and I think there's a lot of discussion right now and debate in the larger national community about the implications for our engagements militarily in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other parts of the world. The notion being that it may be time now for us to begin to draw down on our investments there after so many years and to rethink a much more domestically focused approach, a much more comprehensive set of investments around things that we have consequently had to put aside out of certain policy choices. I note that it's not something that the federal government typically assumes as a major responsibility when we talk about education. We see 3% of the federal budget being invested in that. But I'm just wondering if you think that not unlike the period after the end of the Cold War, there might not be something like a peace dividend that could create a different kind of economics, a different kind of sensibility about how we budget, particularly around education, and some of the allied issues that we deal with in the training sphere and the economic development and workforce development spaces. Is there any light at the end of this tunnel that we're in which just looks darker and darker on the budget side that would hopefully give us space to open up that kind of conversation? With California as a leader through our delegation and our leadership in the higher education field, sort of helping to advance that discussion, or is that just something that is not foreseeable in the near-term future, in your judgment?
It'll be an. To be frank, I don't see it, and I don't see it because of a number of factors. You'll see in the presidential election that's about to transpire soon. People are running for office as we speak. They're running for the primaries. We have a number of candidates who have expressed interest in demolishing the Department of Education, for an example. At the federal level, I just noted what the Pell Grant program, the problems that we're having with Pell, the cost of Pell. But if you take a step back and if you think about it, this is an equity-based program. If you have need and you want to go to college, the federal government's going to step up and support you to go to college. It shouldn't really, at the end of the day, matter how much it costs for us to support students that are essentially coming from families that have less than $30,000 to go off to an institution to get their associate's, baccalaureate degrees. But we're having that conversation now because it's gotten to the point where it costs too much money. But really, at the end of the day, it's what does it cost the country not to educate an individual and support them? So I have hopes that might something like that might occur, but I don't really foresee it, to be honest, because we can't even have a rational discussion about Pell, for an example.
Yeah. Thanks for your candor.
Chancellor Scott.
Pardon me. This is a pretty simple question, but when I look at how that budget is split up, as you pointed out, there's a small portion that's discretionary, so a lot of times the argument's over a small portion of the budget. But when it says something like 20% of the budget goes to Social Security, on the other hand, there's a revenue coming in for that part of the budget, whereas, defense, there's no revenue that are, if we talk about anything, education or anything like that, there are no revenues. Right now, how much of the revenue comes as a result of Social Security taxes compared to the 20% outgo? Or do you know that?
I can't give you a straight answer. I do know that right now, we're still bringing in more revenue than we're outsourcing out or distributing out through Social Security. So that's something that is I'm not a Social Security expert, so I can't really go into that. The one thing I will note is that since we eliminated the FEL program, which is the other the bank-based student loan program, the federal government now directs the direct lending program. It actually brings in revenue out of the direct lending program. So that's fairly interesting in that context.
Yeah, that was a step. I know the banks opposed it naturally because they made money off of it.
Yeah.
But I know sitting on that commission that oversees this new direct lending program is our own Jack O'Connell.
Right.
He is. I was talking to Jack the other day, and he told me. He said he and 8 billionaires were sitting on it.
Any other board member comments or questions? If not, thank you so much, Jee Hang. That
Well,
was
thank
very
you so much for having me.
comprehensive, thorough. Appreciate you taking the time to come out here, and hope you can spend a few extra days visiting your family.
Unfortunately, 2 kids,
Ah, there you go.
they're not going to like that.
They're not
So,
gonna like that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.